What is the new normal and how does it actually affect us?
The South African Communist Party's Central Committee is discussing the state of the developing political situation in South Africa. The plenary is focusing on issues affecting the broader social transformation and finding a way forward to adopting the tasks facing the SACP, the ANC-headed alliance and the working class. Let's now listen in on the plenary meeting.
Any further time, I would invite the General Secretary to present the statement of the Central Committee.
Thank you very much, Comrade Alex, and all the officials of the party and members of the media who are joining us. You are most welcome, as Comrade Alex has welcomed you. I'm going to read, as we normally do, in presenting our statement. The SACP Central Committee met on Friday and Saturday, 11th and 12th of September. And owing to the coronavirus pandemic, the meeting convened virtually. Extensive political and organizational reports were tabled by the National Secretariat and discussed over the 2 days. The Central Committee noted the devastating impact the COVID-19 pandemic has had on lives and livelihoods in our country. The impact of the pandemic comes on top of a pre-existing crisis of extraordinary levels of poverty, inequality, and unemployment, deepening challenges of social dislocation and distress in many of our households, including unacceptable levels of interpersonal and particularly gender-based violence. The Central Committee reaffirmed the party's position that a pandemic of this kind was both predictable and predicted. It is directly linked to an aggressive profit-maximizing capitalist system that has destroyed vast stretches of natural habitat, knocking ecological systems out of kilter and bringing humans into contact with new pathogens. The globalized value chains across which capitalism extracts profit have also become the vectors through which pandemics spread rapidly back and forth between the developed North and the underdeveloped South. The COVID-19 pandemic is the foretaste of an even greater, possibly terminal, crisis approaching human civilization, that is the climate crisis. Underlining this point, as the Central Committee was meeting, devastating climate fires were raging in the west of the United States of America. Here in South Africa, government and wider health and social responses to this hitherto unknown and unresearched COVID-19 virus have been relatively commendable, certainly when compared to the denialist and back to business at any cost demagogy of leaders in the US, Brazil, and the United Kingdom, amongst others. However, the impact of the pandemic and the necessary lockdown measures undertaken exposed all the existing fault lines in our society. Crowded townships that make physical distancing impossible, informal settlements without basic sanitation and water, weak public transport that exposes millions to unsafe commutes, households that even before COVID-19 were experiencing food insecurity, and a public healthcare system that has been chronically underfunded. In the face of all this, the Central Committee salutes the heroic work of healthcare and other frontline workers, as well as numerous community action networks and similar community-based volunteerism that emerged organically. As we have said before, whoever thought that a security guard at the gate will take the temperature of a medical doctor entering a hospital? We want to thank these frontline workers. This popular activism as well, based on solidarity, must be deepened and resourced as a critical response to what will now be a long-haul struggle against our multidimensional socio-economic crises. Now, on our public healthcare sector and the national health insurance, the SACP will be intensifying its campaign for the full introduction of the national health insurance to make quality healthcare available to all, especially the working class and poor. The majority of our society have long been excluded by the profit-driven private healthcare sector because they do not have money to buy healthcare as a commodity. The intensification of the National Health Insurance, NHI, campaign will go in hand with the intensification of another important campaign, a campaign against neoliberal austerity. Without the introduction of the NHI and tackling austerity, the public healthcare sector will remain under-resourced and will not be strengthened. The public healthcare sector is expected to take care of the needs of the overwhelming majority of our population. However, it is under-resourced, and this has been worsened by austerity measures and the absence of the national health insurance. The problem is also as a result of the fact that the lion's share of our healthcare expenditure is captured by the profit-driven private healthcare sector that caters for a tiny minority. For example, the amount of contribution made by government to individual medical aid systems goes to the private sector. It doesn't go to support the public sector, which is an anomaly that we have to campaign to redress as part of our NHI campaign. Dedicated frontline workers in the overburdened yet underfunded public healthcare sector did and continue to do their best in the war against COVID-19. Their efforts serving the people wholeheartedly under difficult conditions contributed immensely to South Africa avoiding more loss of lives because of COVID-19. While certain private hospitals became an epicenter of the spread of COVID-19. The SACP salutes again the frontline workers, of whom others contracted the deadly disease on duty while saving the lives of patients, and some of these workers themselves later lost their own lives. It was against this background and wider considerations that the SACP supported the recent action by the National Education, Health and Allied Workers Union, NEHAW. The Central Committee congratulated NEHAW for taking up the issues affecting workers. The SACP calls on the government to engage with NEHAW and other public service unions and address the demands and concerns of the workers. It is the SACP's firm belief that determined engagement by government on this front can lead to common agreement and approaches to the pandemic by all involved. It is very important, therefore, to protect frontline workers, to serve the people without exposing their lives to occupational health and safety hazards. We're also aware, by the way, that in many workplaces, including our public hospitals, we do not have health and safety committees, which are a legal requirement, whose establishment will go a long way in better managing COVID-19 in an inclusive way, both inside and outside public health institutions. The South African Statistics Report, titled Mortality and Causes of Death in South Africa, shows that an overwhelming number of deaths across all age groups in South Africa occur as a result of natural causes of death. In the past 2 decades, from 1997 to 2017, the minimum number of deaths caused by natural causes of death per annum was 83% in 1997, while the maximum was 91.3% in 2006. There can be no doubt the situation persisted beyond 2017 and that COVID-19 worsened it in 2020. According to the COVID-19 South African Resource Portal, COVID-19 caused 15,378 deaths by Saturday, 12th of September 2020, yesterday, since the first positive case of the virus was detected in the country on the 5th of March 2020. The neoliberal economic policy called Growth, Employment and Redistribution, in short, GEAR, imposed in 1996, comprised cuts in social spending, among others affecting health. The government maintained the neoliberal approach at the time with varying extents affecting different areas of broader social transformation and development. The finance policy called fiscal consolidation, another neoliberal austerity approach to social spending, played a key role in that regard. The postponement of the national health insurance by many years was a direct result of neoliberal opposition to the policy of quality healthcare for all. The opposition to the NHI was driven from both inside and outside government and was reflected in budgeting. Yet the high number of deaths caused every year in South Africa by natural causes of death, as documented by Stats SA, shows the need for the NHI, our national health insurance, to make quality health care available to all. The Central Committee also spent a lot of its time on matters, discussing matters relating to corruption, under the theme that we've always carried for some time now, a red card to corruption. But there are many positive features of our collective South African response to the COVID-19 pandemic. There have also been outrageous negative features as well. None more so than the looting of public resources intended for dealing with the health crisis, like the up to 800% markups on health equipment by rent-seeking tenderpreneurs in a number of instances, or the theft of personal protective equipment, PPEs. These are actions that the World Health Organization's Director General has rightfully described as akin to murder. Unfortunately, these wanton acts of corruption are just one more particularly awful example of the rampant scourge of corruption and unethical behavior across much of the public and private sectors. Another dimension of this wanton pillaging of public resources is the theft and destruction of public infrastructure. The Central Committee denounced the looting and vandalizing of public infrastructure. As things stand, many kilometers of the South African railway network, copper and aluminium parts and components, including cables and tracks, and other metal parts and components have been looted. Replacement components and parts at Eskom are also stolen. There is also a strong relationship between this and the exports of scrap metals and the tenderization of the state. Also, many schools have been vandalized, computers and other equipment and materials have been stolen. Roadside pavement construction materials are stolen even before it goes on. More worryingly, the looting and vandalism of public infrastructure have been unabated, judged by the astronomical damage caused and the fact that the road is still going on. This portrays South Africa as a country where lawlessness or anarchy rules in certain areas of the society, a territory where the rule of law is either weak or there is something fundamentally wrong with the state system, or a state that is demonstrably incapable of enforcing the rule of law and protecting public property. An urgent turnaround is essential. There must be accountability by the relevant public entities, government departments, and law enforcement institutions. So must our own alliance lead a campaign for mass education and conscientization on the need by our communities to respect and protect public property. Over several years now, the SACP has campaigned together with the trade union movement, community and faith-based organizations, and even organized business formations against the scourge of crime and corruption. In several provinces, SACP and other alliance anti-corruption activists have been murdered. The Central Committee welcomed the decision of the last ANC-NEC National Executive Committee to intensify the campaign against corruption and deal decisively with all the culprits, including instructing all those charged with fraud, corruption, and other serious crimes in the court of law to step aside. Much as the struggle against corruption must be waged on all fronts, it is important for the ANC as the governing party to take a lead in this regard, including a determined effort to confront all manner of fight-back campaigns, even those fight-back campaigns that are camouflaged in choreographed open letters. We welcome this very firm stance by the National Executive Committee of our ally, the African National Congress. The fight against corruption and crime must also be waged in communities. Inside all non-governmental organizations, political parties, churches, educational institutions, and other social formations. Within this framework, the Central Committee adopted an extensive declaration of interest policy by all its members, but especially its leaders, and amending all previous approaches that we had taken before, as part of strengthening our own leadership's commitment to living cleanly and fighting corruption. This policy will be implemented with immediate effect within the SACP. The Central Committee mandated its political bureau to appoint a revolutionary morality committee in line with the SACP constitution to discharge its responsibilities in relation to the standard of revolutionary morality. The SACP welcomes recent decisions from the side of government that include building greater alignment between the work of investigating and prosecutorial agencies and the amendment to the Commission of Inquiry into State Capture, the Zondo Commission, that will now allow evidence uncovered by the Commission, as well as personnel working for the Commission, to be used by other arms of the criminal justice system. This is very important and a very welcome development on the side of government. The Central Committee also welcomed President Ramaphosa's letter to ANC members, drawing a clear line in the sand. To quote, "We might not be alone in the dock, but we are accused number one," unquote. That's what the president said. The president spoke for a great majority of ANC and alliance members and supporters. He has the full support of the SACP in driving a firm anti-corruption line within our movement. But how do we explain the levels of corruption within our society? Because this is important. And how then do we roll back this scourge? The SACP is not in denial that corruption reached its height during 2009 and 2018 years, that period, more so in the second half of that decade, almost turning our country into a mafia state. But we reject the simplistic commonplace argument embedded in the notion or narrative of 9 wasted years, that it all began in 2009. Before that, it was hunky-dory. We reject that notion. There was, for instance, the doleful legacy of the late apartheid years when sanction-busting criminal networks flourished and then infiltrated the post-apartheid institutions, including, by the way, the corruption in the former Bantustans, which flourished in the lead up to 1994. And this did not play an unimportant role in the first post-1994 major corruption scandal, the Strategic Defense Acquisition, widely known in the media as the arms deal. But there was also in the mid-1990s the misguided and unnecessary and uncalled for neoliberal repurposing of the new democratic state, abandoning the model we had all adopted as an alliance through the Reconstruction and Development Program, turning the democratic state into a procurer of goods and services, a tenderized state with key developmental public utilities now corporatized and either wholly or partially privatized. We argue this laid the basis, actually, for the scaling up of what nearly became a mafia state from 2009. The capacity of the state, in other words, has been deliberately and drastically reduced. We now have private security companies, strangely enough, guarding police stations. Who had thought of that? And courts of law. Basic municipal services are outsourced, and much of government is reliant on overpaid consultants, some of them former public servants, for policy development. We even told that in government today, even your annual performance plans, some of them are outsourced, are being done by consultants instead of by senior officials in government departments. A huge part of the civil service is accordingly engaged not in providing services or producing goods, but in tendering, with all the moral hazard that is now so apparent. In other words, if we're not careful, we are in danger of increasingly producing not skilled and professional civil servants, much as many of them are still there. But if we do not arrest this, we will increasingly now be producing professional tenderers. The Central Committee reaffirmed the SACP's stance against the tenderization of the state. Besides measures that coalesced around hollowing out of the strategic capacity of the state, tenderization of the state has directly led to curtailing of the role of the state in the economy and productive activity in favor of economic control by the private wealth accumulation sector. We mustn't be misunderstood. We're not calling for tomorrow no tenders by the state, but at the same time to have turned every service of the state into a tender is a problem, because that is tenderization, which has also seen the weakening of the capacity of the state. Hence, the weakening of state-owned enterprises and other public entities. This is now accompanied by measures aimed at exposing the assets of state-owned entities and other public entities to private sector exploitation for a greater share in private wealth accumulation competition. The working class need to unite to stop the maneuvers to convert South Africa into a full-blown capitalist tender state. The Central Committee further called for an urgent release of the funds, as already committed by the government, to rescue and restructure the South African Airways, SAA, towards becoming a viable, growing and thriving national airline. The SACP is acutely aware of attempts by those who want to feed and profit from the carcass of the SAA to work towards the liquidation of the national airline, for nothing else but to satisfy their greed. A national airline, or an airline in which the state has a significant stake, is crucial as part of our aviation industrial strategy, such as the air cargo industry, as an important sector in international trade, as well as the role of such an airline in tourism, among others. A well-managed whole-of-state guided national airline is also crucial for post-COVID-19 crisis turnaround. The SACP will continue engaging with the formations of organized workers and the alliance on this score. The tenderization of the state has also led to the creation of many unnecessary tenders. While corruption is wider in scope, the reality is that the corruption pandemic is concentrated in tenders, procurement, supply chain management, outsourcing, and privatization. These and other measures are used to convey the functions of the state and the public to private wealth accumulation interests. In this regard, the neoliberal and parasitic networks are pushing in the same direction. The difference is in the methods of their work. The neoliberal networks use policy making as a lever to push their agenda, while the parasitic networks are brazen smash and grab tactics. Neither the neoliberal nor the parasitic networks are the solution for South Africa's transformation and development challenges. Put differently, the fight against the parasitic networks who are looting the state must not be substituted by the emergence of neoliberal networks. Nor should a fight against neoliberalization of our state and the economy be used as an excuse for parasitic networks to loot. A first key priority, therefore, is to rebuild an effective criminal justice system and related institutions to deal with corruption, but also with other grave social crimes like gender-based violence. But we will not roll back corruption systemically if we do not also look at the wider state. We need to rebuild state capacity to provide goods and services, to lessen the amount of outsourcing, and where procurement is required, to ensure that it is done differently, without all manner of intermediary rent seekers, and that the state is a price maker, not a price taker in the process. At the moment, the state is procuring lots of goods, but the state is often told how much you are going to pay us for the goods you are procuring, instead of the other way around. Because we procure in such big numbers, we should be telling those who are providing those goods to say, this is how much we want to pay because of the advantage of large numbers that we procure as the state. That's what we mean, that the state should be a price maker rather than a price taker, which is a huge source for corruption. Building a capable state in our context, therefore, must mean building a democratic developmental state. We are frequently told that we do not have the resources to build a national health insurance, for instance, or that we cannot expand the public service. But those who are very silent about the massive drain of resources out of our country by monopoly capital, through capital flight, both legal and illegal, through the use of tax havens, transfer pricing, false invoicing, profit shifting, and much more. One academic study, for instance, suggests that an equivalent of some 20% of our gross domestic product was lost in this way in 2007 alone. Let alone, by the way, those who are very big sometimes claiming to fight against corruption. We are struck by their silence about a hugely wasteful government system that is based in both Pretoria and Cape Town, a colonial inheritance that continues to waste billions of rands. A key feature of a democratic developmental state must therefore be the capacity to discipline private capital. Since the mid-1990s, we've thrown away many of the instruments for achieving such a capacity. With excessive trade and financial liberalization and the failure to apply prescribed asset requirements, something the apartheid regime had no hesitation in doing. At a minimum, the SACP is saying the agreements of the 2002 Financial Sector Summit on, amongst others, implementing prescribed assets must now be done without any further delay. As the recently released SA Gross Domestic Product statistical release indicates, and expectedly the South African economy, like many others across the world, that it has plummeted in the second quarter of 2020 due to the impact of COVID-19. The pandemic has deepened the capitalist system's pre-existing chronic economic crisis, with serious implications for social reproduction, that is, the sustenance of life by households. There is no other way forward except to drive the alliance's shared strategic perspective of the second radical phase of our democratic transition. To drive this second phase, South Africa needs a capable developmental state buttressed by popular power, the democratic power of a united working class, and other progressive strata who would like to see a better South Africa for all. Standing in the way of addressing the systemic features that underpin our corruption pandemic are therefore those forces that continue to cling to an increasingly discredited neoliberal fundamentalism. Those forces in our country that are more IMF than the IMF, more World Bank than the World Bank of 2020. Unfortunately, these include some of our people in the Treasury and the South African Reserve Bank. Not everyone, obviously. In court papers, the National Treasury has even gone so far as to say that it would be immoral to honor government's public sector wage agreement. In the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic and huge economic and social distress, the South African Reserve Bank has been prepared to inject significant liquidity into the private banking oligopoly, but declined to provide a stimulus liquidity into public financial institutions like the DBSA and IDC. President Ramaphosa's well-intentioned stimulus package, thanks to Treasury austerity fixation, is barely a stimulus at all, but that represents the rejigging of existing budgets by defunding many existing government programs. We say we must all do what we can to make sure that the president's stimulus package does indeed become a real stimulus package. While the SACP commends the consultative approach undertaken by President Ramaphosa, particularly through NADLEC, in preparing an economic turnaround plan, we fear that many excellent ideas, ranging from a universal basic income grant, a major social and economic infrastructure program, to a massive expansion of public employment programs, will either not take off or will be constrained by fiscal austerity, that they will fail to have the necessary strategic transformational impact. It's important that we make sure that these things do not fail. The working class and all progressive forces need to organize to strengthen the hand of government in this regard to ensure that we do indeed succeed in this turnaround strategy. The Central Committee denounced the National Treasury's characterization of the government's compliance with the Public Service Wage Agreement as immoral. We reiterate our call on government to honor its public sector wage agreement. The Central Committee expressed overwhelming support for the socio-economic action called by COSATU. The action will take place on the 7th of October 2020. Its objectives include anti-corruption objectives, decent work day. The Central Committee also reiterated the statement released by the SACP on the 6th of September 2020, strongly condemning the racist advert by Clicks, the company, and calling for decisive action by the South African Human Rights Commission, amongst others. The Central Committee further expressed solidarity with the non-racial and non-sexist workers employed by Clicks. Because Clicks has done this mess up, we must then not be the ones who are found endangering the lives, safety, and job opportunities for workers at Clicks. That is why it is important that we do not allow such struggles against racism to be hijacked by populists, opportunists, demagogues, or anarchists. The working class must be at the center of the struggle against racism and all other forms of discrimination. Indeed, as the SACP, we are proud, we're the first non-racial political party ever in the history of South Africa. The SACP has also been actively involved in the struggle to tackle gender-based violence and racism. The work includes joint campaign activities with our alliance partners and other social formations. The Jack Simons National Party School of the SACP and the launch of the Josimpama Gender Equality Series have contributed positively to these efforts. The SACP will continue deepening the efforts against gender-based violence, patriarchy, and racism towards a fully non-sexist and non-racial society. The Central Committee also endorsed the plan to relaunch a campaign that was, by the way, led by our late General Secretary, Comrade Chris Hani, in 1992-93, that of the Triple H campaign, the campaign for human settlements, for healthcare and against hunger, and water. Further details will be announced closer to the campaign launch. The COVID-19 crisis, on top of an existing economic and social crisis, has given particular urgency to campaigning around the intersecting human settlement, health, food security and food nutrition, and lack of water and sanitation as some of the key challenges affecting the working class and the poor. The Central Committee also expressed solidarity with the people of Zimbabwe, many of whom found themselves with no other option but to leave or flee the country. South Africa is host of them and is in many ways directly impacted by the crisis in Zimbabwe. We are not talking about this just from the air. The assertions that there is no crisis in Zimbabwe are nothing but a denial of the self-evident truth. In fact, you don't even have to go to Zimbabwe to see the crisis. You only have to go to our own informal settlements in South Africa to see how many Zimbabweans who love good life, who are trying to make an honest living for their families, have had to come to South Africa in order to make a living because of the crisis that we have there. Therefore, the assertions that there is no crisis in Zimbabwe are nothing but a denial of the self-evident truth. That's the SACP's very strong view. The people of Zimbabwe should independently solve the problems affecting their country. Yes, but help by the SADC and the African Union is important. And also international solidarity is crucial. Swaziland is also facing a crisis. The absence of democracy in that country and consequent problems remain a key challenge. The Central Committee expressed solidarity with the people of Swaziland who are struggling for democracy. The SACP Central Committee also took this meeting once more to express its solidarity with the people of Western Sahara, Syria, Palestine, Cuba, Bolivia, Nicaragua, and others across the world in the face of imperialist aggression, and not least Venezuela, which is also facing persistent destabilization by the Trump government. The Central Committee welcomed the emergence of progress indicators towards the resolution of the long-standing Sudanese crisis. Lastly, the Central Committee took its meeting also to express sincere condolences to the families of its members, frontline workers in the war against COVID-19, and all South Africans that lost their loved ones since our last plenary session of May 2020. We say to all South Africans who lost their loved ones, kindly receive our most sincere and profound condolences as the Communist Party. And we say this because as South African communists, other than being the sons and daughters of ordinary South Africans. The Central Committee paid tribute to its members and the stalwarts of our liberation struggle who passed away since our last plenary in May 2020. These names include Comrades John Dlamini, George Bezos, Ahmad Dango, Peter Tambuza, John Kadimeng, Lieutenant General Vijay Ramlakan, Andrew Mlangeni Istwalandwe, Ronald Mfukeng, Joyce Pekane, Siabulela Siswana, Papa Dikose, Lucas Peter Nchabeleng, Mbuyiselo Jacobs, Tsigelelo Colin Jack, Hisham Mohammed, Shahid Raji, Zinzi Mandela, Fred Kona, Thomas Mantanta, and many others, most of whom are indeed our unsung heroes. Thank you very much.
Thank you, GS. I will now take this opportunity to invite media practitioners to ask questions. On the screen panel of your Zoom applications, there is an icon to raise a hand. You just press there and then we will identify you and move you from the attendee so that you can ask your question. I have two questions, or I have two hands so far. It's Sophie Mukwena and Debo Mugobo, both from the SABC. Let me take the two and then I will open for another round. Sophie?
Yes, my name is Sophie Mkwena, the foreign editor at SABC. Mr. Nzimande, you spoke about the situation in Zimbabwe. Clearly, the regime there has emphasized the fact that there is no crisis in Zimbabwe, while people feel that, yes, there is no crisis in Zimbabwe, but there's a crisis in South Africa. And yesterday, we saw the reports around how the spokesperson of ZANU-PF, Mr. Chinamasa, launched a scathing attack on the ANC in particular, and also the efforts by the South African government through its envoys to try and get the facts on the ground. What is the solution? Is the alliance going to pursue the discussions with ZANU-PF? And then the second question is related to COVID-19. The WHO has indicated last week that when you look at the impact to the global economy, we are likely to see a loss of 15 trillion US dollars. And clearly the poorer nations and the developing countries, particularly your G77, are going to suffer. There has been a request to the G20, that includes South Africa, the only country representing Africa in the G20, and also a request directed to the G7, your most industrialized nations, to look at the issue of the debt of poorer nation, and the president saying this must be really looked at. What is your view? How do we recover as the globe after the impact of COVID-19? And now there's also a talk that the only way is to have a vaccine and you can do business as usual. But if you don't have a vaccine, it will take time. And we see America and other developed nations now propagating vaccine nationalism. How are you going to handle this? What needs to be done?
Thank you very much, Memokwena. Let me invite Ndebo Mukobo.
Well, my name is Ndebo Mukobo. I'm with the SABC. My question goes to the General Secretary, Dr. Blade. I've seen that you've spoken about the detenderization of the state. This call for the detenderization of the state started a long time ago in the late 90s, if not early 2000. You've been calling for the ANC government to detenderize the state because you felt that that on its own was formed the basis of the rampant corruption that has come to characterize South Africa. So the question is, aren't you disappointed that it seems you're preaching to people who are not reading the same Bible that you guys are reading? And again, you've said something about the looting of the public infrastructure. You said that portrays South Africa as a country that is incapable to ensure the rule of law. I mean, this thing has been going on for some time, the looting of infrastructure. And some people see it as the political class. It's no longer focusing on governance. Instead, they're focusing on enriching themselves. So as a result, this issue of ensuring that public infrastructure is protected seems to have taken a second, the back seat. So do you really think that while the country is so engulfed in corruption, ensuring, saving or protecting public infrastructure will really be something that the current political class will be focusing on, as opposed to enriching themselves?
What has happened to Alex now?
Thank you, Ndebo. I had muted myself. I invited Natasha Piri to ask her question because her hand is up.
Okay. Hi, everybody. It's Natasha Piri here from the SABC News. Babi, I just want to know, in regards Still on Zimbabwe, President Cyril Ramaphosa has given the Minister of Defense and Military Veterans, until this evening to finish him with the report on the circumstances to Zimbabwe with a delegation of senior ANC members that was led by the General. Thank you.
Natasha, may you kindly repeat your question?
Oh my gosh, am I not audible? Can you hear me now?
Yes, there was an interference from the studio.
Okay, sorry about that. So mine is just still staying on Zimbabwe. I just wanted a reaction from Ubab Mzimande regarding President Ramaphosa's asking the Minister of Defense and Military Veterans, Nosiviwe Mapisa Ngakula, to furnish him with a detailed report on the circumstances that led to her sharing a flight to Zimbabwe with a delegation that was led by the Secretary General of the ANC, U.S. Magashule.
Okay. Thank you very much for the powerful questions asked. They really show that you are hands-on the issues and you are well ahead. I will invite the leadership of the SACP to reply to the questions. General Secretary, two Deputy General Secretaries, National Treasurer, and Deputy National Chair. I will hand over to you.
Okay, thanks, Alex. Of course, my comrades will come in where they want to add, where they feel that maybe I may have left something. Look, Sophie, you know, we don't want to be seen as if we are just playing the game of semantics, fiddling while the Rome burns, you know. The fact of the matter, the starting point is that the whole of the Southern African region is in very deep economic crisis, including a crisis of what we call social reproduction, social and inability of communities to make ends meet as a result of a combination of a number of factors, some of them historical, some of them external, and others internal reasons. And it's not a sign of weakness to admit that on the part of any ruling party or movement in any country for that matter, or in the region. We know in South Africa that the movement, for instance, the migration from the rest of the SADC region into South Africa, this is not a xenophobic statement, Sophie, it's just describing a reality, is a sign of this crisis. I know of many Zimbabweans who would not like to be in South Africa for that matter. But they are here because they are legitimately, many of them, trying to make a living, make ends meet. In other words, what we are having here are increasingly what one would call economic refugees. So to deny that there is a crisis or even in Zimbabwe is just semantics, really. We will be able, sometimes it's said that understanding and describing properly the nature of the problem, you are already halfway towards addressing the problem. And it's not a sign of weakness to actually admit that there is a crisis, a socio-economic crisis in the region, most of the African continent, frankly, worsened and exposed by COVID-19, by the way. There may be specific issues relating to Zimbabwe that, as we say in our statement, Zimbabweans themselves must solve this problem. But as the SACP, we are also saying international solidarity with Zimbabweans is important. So is the role of SADC and the African Union. So that is our approach to understanding the situation in Zimbabwe. We are not being judgmental. We ourselves, if you look at our statement, is identifying the many crisis areas and crisis points that we have as a country. And that's not a sign of being weak. The sign of weakness actually is denialism. Denialism, that's what is a sign of weakness. Not to properly understand the nature of the challenge that we face. Indeed, now we are faced, the whole world. Some people are even arguing that post-COVID is likely to become like the situation post-Second World War. Others are even saying post-Second World War was better. Maybe the situation would be like after the 1929 Great Depression. And as South Africa are aware of that, the statistics are indicating that and so on. That is why we in our statement, one thing that we welcome is the president's commitment to some economic recovery plan or growth and development plan, as we would prefer to call it as the SACP, prioritizing infrastructure investment, for instance. We support that. That is why, though, in supporting that, we are pointing out that there are two main dangers and threats to that plan. One is austerity, cutting everything with no prioritization, to cut our nose, to spite our face, and secondly, looting and corruption. Those are the things that are a threat, as we say, in this plan. But we otherwise fully support it, and we need to ensure that we mobilize our own forces, the working class, to make sure that this plan indeed does succeed on our side. So we're going to be party, as the SACP, we have always sought to be party to the solution. We analyze because we want to find solutions. But it is going to be a global crisis. And also you are pointing at a danger, another danger, that what COVID-19 has done is not only just to further expose inequalities between the North and the South, but also it's worsening those inequalities. We are aware that government is embarking on a plan for this to be supported. I am aware in my own deployment, I'm part of that in government, so that we ensure that Africa and South Africa, we are not last in the queue, even when the vaccine is found. But also, we are aware as the Communist Party that we're going to have a struggle against capitalists who will see the founding of a vaccine as yet another means of accumulation rather than as means of saving lives. That requires that we are also able to mobilize. That's why in launching our Red October campaign, mentioning health, we are not only going to be talking about the NHI, we are also going to be taking up the struggles around a vaccine if and when it is found. Debo, there are many, we share your observations, but maybe we are more optimistic as the SACP that we have to win this battle. We believe that as a country, and with the commitment shown by the president and the latest commitment by the National Executive Committee of the ANC as the ruling party, we are confident that we will win the struggle against the tenderization of the state and the associated corruption that comes out of that. But it needs campaign on the ground. That's why we ourselves have launched our own anti-corruption campaign, Red Card to Corruption, and we are going to be supporting COSATU in its struggle, also waging a campaign against corruption, hoping that we will unite as wide a range of forces behind the struggle against corruption. And many other measures that are being taken, there are positive signs. For instance, the fact that government has said all PPE tenders must be published, who benefited from that. We have long been calling for this as the SACP, that part of making tenders more transparent and security is to make sure that we know who tenders. Gauteng was even talking about an open tender system where you can have people sitting and watching how these tenders are decided upon rather than secretly. We support that as the SACP because we think this measure, latest measure by government, we're not as cynical as some people were to say, well, what is new about listing this? It's already showing who is benefiting. And also some people are exposed that these are not manufacturers or even legitimate distributors of PPEs. They are just middlemen. They are often men, by the way. Natasha, on the issue of the Zim delegation, we did not discuss this matter as the SACP. We would rather take an approach to say, let's wait and get all the information on this matter before we start making public comments, including engaging our own ally about what really happened in this matter. After which then, from an informed basis, we are then going to possibly comment. Thank you very much. I don't know if my comrades want to add as well.
Thank you, GS. Just before there can be additions, there is a question from Lize Gatwando from News 24. I will read it, but her hand is up. Perhaps she wishes to say something more. The question reads, YCL, the Young Communist League, has in the recent past warned that the government and the ANC under President Ramaphosa is turning back towards neoliberal tendencies, that the center is not holding. Do you agree as the SACP? The second one, which is related to that one, reads as follows. COSATU recently expressed a lack of confidence in the president and the war of corruption, even calling him confrontational averse. Does the SACP have any opinion on the president's performance, especially towards the war on corruption? Those are two of Lizeka's questions, and there will be a follow-up from Ndebo. But now let's complete this first round before we go to the second round.
Can I just quickly come in, Alex, and let my comrades please feel free to come in. Look, in our statement, we are very clear that neither parasitic state capture looting networks nor neoliberalism is going to help us. Rather, we need a distinctly developmental path. Some of those elements we have outlined in our statement. Indeed, in this battle against state capture networks, there are those who are seeing an opportunity to reinstate neoliberalism. Even in the president's battle against corruption, they see an opportunity to reinstate neoliberalism. We are opposed to that. It's not just an ideological stance, by the way. We had neoliberalism from 1996 till about 2008. Yes, there was economic growth, but there was job loss growth. There were no new jobs on the whole in numbers that were added to the economy. Even where there were new jobs, but on the whole, unemployment just continued to rise. And we also paid other prices. We chased the economic deficit, or what you call was the social deficit was widening during that neoliberal era. So we are talking from experience and our own analysis of actually what happened, that neoliberalism is not going to help us. In fact, neoliberalism is as dangerous as parasitic state capture networks in terms of achieving our overall objectives. That's our very strong view as the SACP. And we do believe that in South Africa, we have got enough South Africans to be able to unite behind forging a common front against those who are amongst those who are against both parasitic state capture networks and neoliberalism. We support the president's stance to fight corruption, as we say in our statement. We think it is important that we have a president who has staked out his own reputation on fighting against corruption. But our stance as the SACP is that we therefore cannot just leave that struggle to the president alone. If we leave it to the president alone, we might as well say goodbye to that struggle against corruption. It means all of us as South Africans, we need to stand up and support that effort. The fact that now we have a president who has come out and we have a National Executive Committee out of its last meeting coming out very clearly should also be a clarion call to us as allies and to the rest of South Africans to say, let's all stand up and not throw stones at each other. We don't like that as the SACP. It doesn't mean we are not going to be critical. Our statement is critical on a number of things, but let's not throw stones. Let's mobilize to support the president. That is our approach. I don't know if my comrades then want to add. Please do, comrades. Alex, you are muted. At your age, you shouldn't forget to unmute yourself.
National Office Bearers of the SACP, I have passed half 80 some years back.
No addition, comrade.
No addition. Comrade Chris, Comrade Joyce. Okay, there are no additions. Let me invite back Ndebo Mukobo, who has a follow-up question. And Ndebo?
Yes, Alex. My question on the looting of public infrastructure hasn't been answered. Okay. And my follow-up question would be, I've seen that the SACP had decried or denounced maybe the attitude or the conduct of the EFF on the clicks matter. You see, our racists have been emboldened since the last few years. And we've seen, especially the alliance partners, COSATU as the biggest labor federation, noting all racist attitudes towards Black people. And the vanguard of the working class, the SACP, also noting and lamenting. And of course, the leader of the alliance, the ANC, also just noting all racist comments that were made or meted out against Black people. For some time, Black people have been treated as objects of ridicule. And it seems the alliance and its partners, they only sort of lamenting, but nothing has been done. And does it have to take the EFF to get clicks and its ilk to apologize and to show remorse and to even say they're going to do 1, 2, 3, as opposed to the alliance partners, especially the vanguard of the poor, Black, and the working class, the SACP, to champion that, to say that we cannot allow Black people to be treated as they are 26 years into democracy.
Thank you, Ndebo. I could hear that the question is drafted from the bottom of your heart. And thank you for that question. The party leadership will provide a clarification. There is this other question you have raised earlier on about the destruction of public infrastructure. I will invite answers to the two questions.
I give to the first DGS or any other comrade to start this time on these issues.
Comrade Soli, you are invited to start.
Well, also I never intended to passionate on both matters.
No, I never intended to start to come in, Chair, because I think the statement was quite clear, and Comrade Blade, our GS, said articulated it quite well, even in the answers. Safe to say, perhaps from the heartfelt, sincere expression by Ndebo, as Black as I am, I've been victim of racism on many occasions. So, like many other South Africans, I think what we are saying in our statement is that we need a deeper transformational agenda against, in the field of transforming South Africa towards a non-racist country and fight against any form of racism, whether it's driven by corporates, in particular, in this instance, for instance, cliques, as we have said in our statement. But you are right that corporate South Africa, like many others who rely on the laws of the land to transform, have in many instances disregarded those laws. And corporate South Africa has rejected transformation. We have put in processes to be within the framework of the laws, whether it's affirmative action, Black economic empowerment policies, including broad-based Black economic empowerment policies. By the way, the broad-based concept was largely driven from the SACP's campaigns as well. Is that in all of these interventions, they can ignore you and life goes on. But it doesn't have to take destruction of property in a general sense for us to think that they have listened. Because I don't think that the action that has been taken will end racism. But it has sent an important message, nonetheless, to corporate South Africa to seek to transform. That is why we've said we also respect workers at cliques and their livelihoods that needs to be protected, and that any measure that we take should actually consider their interests as well. It shouldn't just satisfy us as a political organization. I mean, we launched a campaign for transformation of the financial sector, which this year will be, it will be 20 years. Transformation and diversification of the financial sector, where we wanted the state to build public banks, to have capacity in our country as well, the laws that will allow for cooperative banks, community banks, and mutual banks that will serve the interests of our people. In our marches across the country over these 2 decades, we never destroyed a single bank. It doesn't mean that we don't differ with the owners of the banks. We have taken them to the financial sector campaign through NetLeg and others, like the point that we're making in our statement about prescribed assets, for instance. These issues were agreed from that time. So it's important that these transformational programs are taken into account. If you take the point we're raising in our statement about prescribed assets, we didn't have to go to the IMF, for instance. But it's the neoliberals at the Treasury that decided by hook or crook, we have to go to the IMF when it was not necessary. We have enough resources in this country to tackle our challenges without tying ourselves to these international bodies. So that's just one example. But overall, we condemn violence in the strongest terms possible, because that's not revolutionary violence, if you like. We took up arms. We led our movement in taking up arms to defend and to fight for national liberation of this country. That was revolutionary violence, if you like. So the destruction of property, we launched a campaign, and I think our comrades here in Gauteng have led in that regard. Comrade Mamabolo, even when he was deployed in government, he led in this campaign for people not to destroy public property and to defend public property. And not only did we do that, we launched a campaign to repair roads, for instance, in Gauteng as the Communist Party. So we want to embrace, to call on South Africans to embrace public property and public interest economy, and to see what is done by our government as belonging to all of us. So we take the points that you are raising, and they are concerning us. We'll continue to fight on this to also ensure that the detenderization of the state takes place. You are right. We raised this question almost 2 decades ago, but it's now more apparent, and I think that South Africa now agrees with us. Now that South Africa agrees with us and they see the dangers that are caused by tenders, we think we are now ready to launch a massive campaign with all South Africans to do away with the tenders in the manner that they are processed today in this country, so that we can have a system where the masses of our people can participate in the general space of the economy.
Thank you, Comrade Soli. Is there any further addition or conclusion? In the absence of a further addition, I will take the last question, which may or may not be a follow-up, and after that we will close the press briefing. I will allow Sophie to come back, and that will be the last one, and then we will close after the answer. Thank you. Sophie?
Unmute yourself. Unmute.
Yes, you are unmuted.
Okay. I just want to follow up to Mr. Nzimande on Zimbabwe. I understand your diplomatic stand, and which is perhaps a right thing to do, government to government level, and perhaps because of the relations between the ruling party in South Africa and Zimbabwe. But are you not worried? I mean, you look at what President Emerson Mnangagwa said yesterday, where he said he's going to evoke the extradition treaty between South Africa and Zimbabwe to send back those Zimbabweans who are troublesome. We saw this thing happening in 2010, the redemption of the Zimbabwean nationals, who some of them were killed in Zimbabwe, which might be a case for International Criminal Court or a blight on South Africa's history that you handed over the people, and at the end of the day, this is what has happened. Don't you think it's time for political parties on the continent to be frank and upfront where there are signs of abuse of laws and regulations and treaties, to punish those that don't agree with the ruling parties in the respective countries? And then the last one, to Ndade Mapaila, you spoke about the issue of the loan and the treasury. Minister Blade Nzimande is part of cabinet. I am certain this matter was raised. Do you think perhaps it will be proper for SACP to question the IMF and the World Bank loan and African Development Bank and BRICS Bank? Because you had a privilege sitting in cabinet to question this. And are you suggesting treasury is a law unto itself? And judging from Minister of Finance, who's non-repentant in terms of his statement around the direction the country must take in the transformation of the economy of South Africa, or perhaps the economic policies.
Thank you, Memukwena, for powerful questions. I must say that these questions are important, all of them, because they allow the leadership to provide clarity. And at least these days we hold these press conferences in the public through the internet, as imposed by COVID-19. I will allow the leadership to respond, and before we can close the press briefing.
Okay. Thanks to Comrade Soli on his comments earlier, and to yourself, Comrade Alex. Look, just before I come back to Sophie's questions, maybe just to add on Debo's question, one of the things we are committing ourselves to do as the SACP on the issue of destruction of public property is that whatever campaign we wage or we launch, we are going to embed the campaign and struggle to protect public property. For example, we will be launching our Red October campaign now, which was adopted by the Central Committee on health. Part of what we'll have to do is the importance of protecting our clinics, so that when communities are protesting about the absence of a road, you don't destroy a clinic. When students are unhappy about NSFAS, they don't go and burn down an HIV counseling center in an institution, and so on. When we are talking about human settlements or we are talking about water, we must protect our water infrastructure as part of our campaign. So every campaign we're going to be waging, we're going to embed this issue of conscientizing and engaging our people around the importance. No matter how angry we can be, tomorrow we'll still need that infrastructure. So that is one way we see ourselves as the party. We said we're going to take responsibility, not just going to shout on the side. We're going to take responsibility ourselves and embed in all our campaigning this issue of infrastructure. Now, to Sis Sophie, let me start maybe with the latter part of your question, because I think it relates to how the alliance functions. If cabinet takes a decision and I am a member of cabinet, I'm bound by that decision as Nzimande by virtue of being a member of that cabinet. If that decision is in conflict with the decision of the SACP, then it means it's a matter that requires attention in the alliance. Definitely. That is why, as the SACP, by the way, this issue of the loans from the IMF and the World Bank, we have placed these issues very strongly in alliance discussions. As the SACP, we have done so, and we have raised them. We even at the alliance also provided a very extensive critique of the Treasury's document on structural reforms that it actually produced at some stage. That is how we operate. So it can't be then that, because as communists we are guided by a simple fact, you are bound by the decision of whichever structure you are working in. Now I can't then come here and say, well, this is what I said in cabinet. No. Cabinet took a decision and bound by it. If it conflicts with the SACP, it means the alliance needs to discuss that. So that's an important matter that I thought I need to make. That's how we operate. Otherwise, if we don't do this, we'll destroy the alliance itself, as well as working together in government. I don't want to be responding to President Mnangagwa. It's unfortunate if he made the kinds of comments that you say that he has actually made. But that is why also as the SACP, we support party-to-party engagement very strongly. We support the ANC's reaching out to ZANU-PF to engage politically as political parties. We ourselves, by the way, we are engaging. We may not of late, although early around 2002, 2003, we engaged with ZANU-PF when a senior party delegation visited Zimbabwe. Interestingly, pointing out that the similar kinds of issues that are being raised now. But at the moment, we have got extensive networks with Zimbabweans, both in ZANU-PF, we have got comrades that we engage with as the SACP, as well as in the opposition parties. We also now have got a very close relationship with the newly formed Zimbabwe Communist Party. It's still small. We hope it's going to grow. We engage with them on a whole range of issues, including self-critically looking at ourselves and our respective strategies. That is why it is unfortunate that when a government delegation goes to Zimbabwe, it does not meet with other formations and forces as well, because that should not ideally be a threat. But it's unfortunate that it actually happens. I'm not sure about the details of changing the laws on the part of President Mnangagwa to get people back to Zimbabwe and so on. I'm not so sure whether that is the best way to actually deal with the situation. But we don't want to be too judgmental. It's unfortunate, though, if such statements have actually been made. But engagement is very important, as you say. We must not give up. But it must not be a substitute for solidarity, as we often do in relation to struggles in many other countries, whether it's Swaziland, whether it's Venezuela, whether it's Cuba. There's nothing that rules out Zimbabwe as and when we feel appropriate to actually express solidarity, which we have done with the Zimbabwean people, and seek to push them towards finding a solution to whatever problems that they are facing. Thank you.
Thank you, JS. Is there any addition?
Yeah. No, I just want to respond to what.
Please mention that. Please mention that I was held in Zimbabwe. Please mention it.
No, I think let me just say to our Sophie, yes, indeed, Comrade Alex, was arrested in Zimbabwe for supporting our comrades from the Communist Party of Zimbabwe. And we had to intervene for his release because there was no basis for his arrest, for that matter. But I think there's growing authoritarianism in Zimbabwe, which we reject with the contempt that it deserves, particularly from our comrades in ZANU-PF. We don't think that a revolutionary movement should decline in its ethos and democratic practices in the manner that is happening. Whilst denying it, we see many Zimbabweans running away from their own country. And I think if any revolutionary movement will think that they can achieve any objectives without their people, it's a pipe dream. But on the question that you raised, the GS touched a little bit on it regarding the way in which the alliance operates. When he goes to cabinet, he doesn't cease to be a communist. But cabinet is not a communist cabinet. We wish we could have that one day in this country, which of course it will happen, and will drive things differently. But with regard to the IMF and the World Bank and the posture of our government, and particularly the Treasury, one may say that Treasury actually represents the most conservative and right-wing section of our government that is outrightly frustrated, and not only frustrated, but stagnated our economy from growing. We have a massive opportunity as this country to grow. But this Treasury has always anchored us in international organizations like the IMF, the World Bank, the OECD countries, and their prescripts on South Africa's economy. Even when they don't stay here, they just use general statistics about analysis of South Africa, and they give policy directives to the Treasury. And we have demonstrated that even to Minister Tito and to the leadership of our alliance. So the Treasury in our government, as much as it is an integral part of our government, it's a very problematic section of our government, and actually is the one that is stagnating the advance of our democratic revolution. We have to, at one point, confront this directly. In fact, if you look at the protection of finance capital right now in the COVID-19 pandemic, we had called from the beginning for the financial sector to protect people's mortgages, houses, cars, loans, and everything else, to have a period of a holiday period for payments. But what Treasury agreed with the banks was extremely nonsensical, something that actually extended by many years the loans of people. So they continue to feed finance capital in this country using this prescripts from this institution that I've just mentioned. So they represent the West of ourselves in government. The only good thing that they have is the fact that they do have functional teams. But for instance, a party that is in power, we can say to the Treasury, let them take the ANC manifesto, which we have all agreed as the alliance, and interpret it in implementation. You'll find that they are taking it the other way around. Because on any other thing, they say there's no money. They gave 200 billion to be handled by these big four banks, of big five banks in this country in the COVID-19 pandemic. 200 billion. How much of it was spent in the pandemic? When they've actually rejected to give same to developmental finance institution, less than 20 billion was spent. Almost about 15 to 18 billion that has been spent. So we have to. And we have not made it a secret in the party. And Comrade Blade, when he read our statement and talks about these things, he's not attacking government. He's representing the party perspectives. He has the right, he's the leader of the Communist Party. He should do so clearly with a clean conscience. And when he goes into that cabinet, he can articulate our views together with Comrade Chulas. If they are defeated on these matters in cabinet, it's okay. But they would have said their views and the views of their own organization. So we don't agree with the manner in which that treasury functions. In fact, that treasury also represents, perhaps in one way or the other, a threat to our own revolution. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, leadership, and thank you, members of the media and the public. This has been a fruitful engagement. One day we will talk about what happens when you are held for 8 hours and interrogated in Zimbabwe. Interrogated the whole day and kicked out of the country to come back. And those are the things. And thank you, Sophie, for your demonstration of a grasp of international affairs, Ndebu, for those powerful questions. Our statement does not mention any other political party except our allies. So the other things that happened, we identified tendencies and clearly said this is not the way to go. We have established law enforcement institutions. That's why 2 days after the Clicks advert, we made a call to the South African Human Rights Commission. And we are looking forward to the people of South Africa supporting us, because as our statement says, there is no way a train will move in South Africa. The rail network has been looted, cables have been stolen, tracks have been stolen, and many other things are gone. This thing is to set us back. We don't want a situation where in future we will say we used to have trains under apartheid and under democracy, the state was sleeping and some of its leaders were stealing and looting and not protecting public property. So this is a very important direction. We wish to thank you very much, and thank you to the SABC, to Newsroom Africa, to News 24, to the Independent Media Group, and all others who graced our press briefing. This is an important interaction that allows us to communicate our views. We would like to sincerely express our gratitude to yourselves. Thank you very much, and thank you to the leadership of the party.
Thank you.
The South African Communist Party Central Plenary Committee meeting or committee plenary briefing just been concluded there, with the central narrative or the central position of the SACP being that the assertion that there is no crisis in Zimbabwe seeks to mask the self-evident truth. And Blaine Nzimande, the General Secretary, saying that you don't actually need to go to Zimbabwe to see the realities, the harsh realities that Zimbabweans face there. The living conditions of our own people paints a much grave picture of the actual situation on the ground in Zimbabwe. And, he also highlighted the lack of democratic freedoms in Swaziland and as well as Venezuela. And he also called out the tenderization of the state. Against that, every single service of the state needs to go to tender, saying that it weakens the capacity of the state and it leads to the creation of unnecessary tenders, hence becoming a potential breeding ground for corruption. And one asked if it was necessary for the country to turn to the International Monetary Fund for funding, and whether the Treasury is a law unto itself. Well, he was quite non-committal and only saying that these issues are thrown on the table of the alliance for further deliberation. That's how the SACP Central Committee plenary briefing concluded just a few minutes ago. Now, the police and prison civil